Margaret Wellington adjusted her black Hermes coat against the autumn chill as her driver held open the door of the gleaming Mercedes. Every Tuesday at precisely 2 p.m., she made this journey to Riverside Cemetery, a ritual she'd maintained religiously for the past 3 years. At 62, Margaret was one of the city's most prominent businesswomen, having built Wellington Industries from a small family firm into a multinational corporation worth billions. But all her success felt hollow without her son. The pristine headstone read James Wellington, beloved son, 1985 to 2021. James had died in a car accident at 36, leaving behind a void that no amount of money or achievement could fill. Margaret had thrown herself deeper into work after his death, becoming even more demanding and isolated than before. Her employees whispered about the Ice Queen, who showed no mercy in business dealings and seemingly no warmth in her personal life. She placed fresh white lilies beside the marble headstone, the same flowers she'd brought every week without fail. "Hello, darling," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "Mother's here again." The quarterly reports came in. "We exceeded projections by 12%. You would have been proud of the sustainability initiative you started. It's revolutionizing our entire production process." The cemetery was unusually quiet today, with only the distant sound of gardeners working and the occasional car passing on the adjacent road. Margaret appreciated the solitude. It was the only place where she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to let the mask of corporate invincibility slip away. She spoke to James about business decisions, about the loneliness that consumed her evenings in the empty mansion, about how she wished she could turn back time and be the mother he deserved. After an hour of one-sided conversation, Margaret kissed her fingertips and touched them to the cold marble. She was about to leave when she noticed something unusual. In the distance, near a section of simpler headstones, she could see someone kneeling beside a grave. The figure appeared to be crying, their shoulders shaking with grief. Normally, Margaret would have looked away. Other people's pain was not her concern, and she had her own sorrow to bear. But something about the scene held her attention. As she walked closer, curiosity overcoming her usual indifference, she could make out more details. It was a young black woman, probably in her late 20s, wearing a simple waitress uniform. Beside her sat a small child, no more than 5 years old, trying to comfort his mother with innocent pats on her arm. The raw emotion in the woman's sobs resonated with something deep inside Margaret, reminding her of her own inconsolable grief in those first months after James's death. As Margaret approached, she could hear fragments of the woman's whispered words carried on the wind. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama tried so hard, but I don't know what to do anymore." The woman's uniform bore the logo of a familiar downtown diner, and Margaret noticed the worn fabric and carefully mended tears that spoke of financial struggles she couldn't imagine. The little boy, with bright eyes and gentle hands, was trying to wipe away his mother's tears. "Don't cry, Mama. Uncle Tommy is watching us from heaven, just like you said." His innocent attempt to provide comfort struck Margaret like a physical blow, reminding her of James at that age, always trying to make everyone around him happy. Margaret hesitated at the edge of respectful distance, torn between her natural inclination to maintain privacy and an unexpected urge to reach out. The headstone was simple concrete, bearing only a name and dates: Thomas Johnson, 1990 to 2024. Fresh flowers lay wilted beside it, carnations from a grocery store, not the expensive arrangements Margaret was accustomed to seeing. The young mother's sobs grew more intense as she spoke to the grave. "The medical bills are drowning us, Tommy. Your treatments cost everything, and now they're saying little Marcus might need surgery too. I work double shifts, but it's never enough. I promised you I'd take care of him, but I'm failing. I'm failing you both." Margaret felt an uncomfortable tightness in her chest. Her own grief had been cushioned by unlimited resources, the best therapists, extended time away from work, the ability to honor James's memory in grand ways. She'd never considered what it might be like to grieve while simultaneously fighting for survival, to mourn while working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Little Marcus noticed Margaret first. "Mama, there's a lady watching us," he said in a small voice, tugging at his mother's sleeve. The woman, who Margaret now guessed was named after the boy had called her mama, looked up with red-rimmed eyes, embarrassment flooding her features as she realized they had an audience. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly, starting to gather her things. "We didn't mean to disturb anyone. Come on, Marcus, we need to get going." Her voice held the exhaustion of someone carrying far more than their fair share of life's burdens. "Please don't leave on my account," Margaret heard herself saying, surprising them both. She stepped closer, noting the woman's defensive posture and the way she instinctively moved to shield her son. "I couldn't help but notice. I lost my son too. 3 years ago." The simple admission hung in the air between them, creating an unexpected bridge across the vast differences in their circumstances. Margaret saw recognition flicker in the young mother's eyes, not of who she was, but of the universal language of parental loss that transcended all social boundaries. "I'm sorry for your loss," the young woman said softly, her defensive posture relaxing slightly. "I'm Jasmine, and this is my son Marcus. We're here visiting my brother Tommy." She gestured toward the simple headstone with trembling hands. He was like a father to Marcus. Raised him with me after his daddy passed when he was just a baby." Margaret knelt down, her expensive coat touching the damp grass without regard for the fabric. At closer range, she could see the exhaustion etched into Jasmine's young face, the worry lines that shouldn't have belonged to someone barely out of their 20s. Marcus, meanwhile, was studying Margaret with the frank curiosity that only children possessed. "You have pretty hair," Marcus said suddenly, reaching out to touch a strand of Margaret's perfectly styled silver hair that had escaped from her chignon. The innocent gesture, so reminiscent of James's childhood boldness, brought unexpected tears to Margaret's eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," Margaret managed, her voice gentler than it had been in years. "You have beautiful eyes. They're very kind, just like your mama's." The compliment seemed to surprise Jasmine, who quickly looked away as if unaccustomed to kind words from strangers. "Tommy loved this little guy more than anything," Jasmine continued, her voice steadying as she spoke about her brother. "He worked construction, saved every penny he could for Marcus's college fund. Then he got sick, cancer, and everything we'd saved went to treatments. He fought for 2 years, never complained, always worried more about us than himself." Margaret found herself listening with genuine interest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in her personal life for years. In the corporate world, she was surrounded by people who told her what they thought she wanted to hear. Here, in the presence of raw grief and authentic emotion, she felt more connected to another human being than she had since James's death. "He sounds like he was a wonderful brother and uncle," Margaret said carefully. "What kind of surgery does Marcus need, if you don't mind my asking?" She wasn't sure what prompted the question. Perhaps it was the way Jasmine had mentioned medical bills, or the protective way she held her son. Jasmine's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Heart surgery. He was born with a defect that we've been monitoring, but it's getting worse. The doctors say it can't wait much longer, but our insurance, it doesn't cover everything. Tommy's treatments used up our savings, and I'm already working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat." The practical problem solver in Margaret immediately began calculating costs and solutions, even as the emotional part of her recoiled at the unfairness of it all. Here was a young mother facing an impossible choice between her child's health and financial survival, while Margaret had enough money sitting in various accounts to solve this problem without even noticing the expense. "The lady smells pretty," Marcus announced, breaking the tension with his innocent observation. "Like the flowers in the fancy hotel where Mama works sometimes." Both women laughed despite their tears, the child's honest perspective providing a moment of lightness in the heavy conversation. Margaret realized she was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years, the desire to help someone, not for business advantage or tax benefits, but simply because it felt right. As they talked, Margaret learned more about Jasmine's struggles. She worked as a waitress at 3 different establishments, breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner downtown, lunch service at the hotel Marcus had mentioned, and evening shifts at a family restaurant near their apartment. Between jobs, She cared for Marcus and tried to manage the overwhelming medical bureaucracy that seemed designed to defeat people like her. "I sleep maybe 4 hours a night," Jasmine admitted, unconsciously running her fingers through Marcus's soft curls. "But what choice do I have? Tommy made me promise to take care of him, and I won't break that promise. I can't." The fierce determination in her voice reminded Margaret of herself at that age, though her own challenges had been confined to boardrooms rather than life-or-death struggles. Margaret found herself sharing more than she had intended. "My son James was a doctor," she said quietly. "Pediatric cardiology, actually. He always said that children's hearts were the most important thing in the world because they carried so much love and hope." The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now meeting a child who needed exactly the kind of help James had dedicated his life to providing. "He sounds wonderful," Jasmine said with genuine warmth. "I bet he helped a lot of kids like Marcus." She paused, then added hesitantly, "What happened to him, if you don't mind me asking?" The question Margaret had deflected from reporters, business associates, and even close friends for 3 years came naturally to this young mother she'd just met. "Car accident. He was driving home from the hospital after a particularly difficult surgery. He'd saved a little girl's life that day. A drunk driver ran a red light." The simplicity of the explanation belied the complexity of Margaret's guilt and regret. She'd been so focused on expanding the business internationally that she'd barely seen James in the months before his death. Their last conversation had been about his frustration with her constant work travel, his feeling that she prioritized corporate success over family relationships. She'd planned to make it up to him, to finally achieve the work-life balance he'd begged her to find. But then he was gone, and all her promises to do better became meaningless. "I'm so sorry," Jasmine whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch Margaret's arm. The simple gesture of comfort from someone who had so little to someone who had so much was almost overwhelming. "He must have been very proud of you, building such a successful business." Margaret almost laughed at the bitter irony. "I'm not sure he was, actually. We argued a lot about my priorities. I kept thinking there would be time later to be the mother he needed, to show him that he mattered more than any business deal." She looked at Marcus, who was carefully arranging pebbles on his uncle's grave. "Don't make my mistakes, Jasmine. This little one needs you present, not just providing." The advice felt hypocritical coming from her own lips, but watching this young mother, who was clearly devoted to her child despite impossible circumstances, made Margaret acutely aware of her own failings. She had been present physically when James was young, but emotionally she'd often been elsewhere, mentally calculating profit margins during school plays and taking business calls during family dinners. A gentle rain began to fall, and Jasmine quickly gathered her things. "We should go," she said, lifting Marcus into her arms despite his protests that he could walk. "My shift at Romano starts in an hour, and I can't afford to be late." Margaret watched them prepare to leave, feeling an unexpected reluctance to end this conversation. For the first time in 3 years, she'd connected with someone on a purely human level, without the filter of business relationships or social obligation. But as Jasmine turned to go, Margaret realized she knew nothing about how to maintain a relationship that wasn't built on professional necessity or social expectation. "Wait," Margaret called out as Jasmine and Marcus reached the cemetery path. The word escaped before she could stop herself, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Would you mind if I gave you my phone number? In case you ever need anything?" Jasmine stopped, her expression carefully neutral. Margaret could see the young woman calculating the risks of accepting help from a stranger, even one who seemed kind. Years of struggle had undoubtedly taught her to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. "That's very generous," Jasmine said diplomatically. "But we barely know each other. I couldn't impose on your kindness." Her polite refusal carried the dignity of someone who had learned to survive on her own terms, even when those terms were impossibly difficult. Margaret felt a familiar frustration rise within her, the same feeling she experienced when negotiations stalled because of unnecessary complications. But this wasn't a business deal, and Jasmine wasn't an employee she could simply override with executive authority. This required a different approach entirely. I understand your hesitation, Margaret said carefully. But I want you to know that my offer comes without strings or expectations. Sometimes people need help, and sometimes other people are in a position to provide it. There's no shame in either position. She pulled out an elegant business card and wrote her personal cell phone number on the back, just in case. Marcus tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mama, the pretty lady is nice. Uncle Tommy always said nice people are gifts from heaven. His innocent wisdom seemed to tip the scales in Margaret's favor, and Jasmine reluctantly accepted the card. Thank you, she said simply, tucking the card into her purse without looking at it. I hope things get easier for you too. Losing someone you love, it never really stops hurting, does it? After they left, Margaret remained at the cemetery longer than usual, her mind churning with thoughts and emotions she'd kept buried for 3 years. She found herself walking back to James's grave, needing to process this unexpected encounter with someone who shared her pain but faced it under such different circumstances. I met someone today, James, she said to the headstone. A young mother with a little boy who needs heart surgery. You would have loved them both. She's incredibly strong, and he's got your curious nature and kind heart. She paused, feeling foolish for what she was about to say. I think I want to help them, but I'm not sure how to do it without making things worse. The practical side of her brain immediately began formulating plans. She could pay for Marcus's surgery, establish a trust fund for his education, help Jasmine find better employment. But something about their interaction suggested that such direct intervention might not be welcome or appropriate. Jasmine had pride and dignity that couldn't be purchased or bypassed, qualities Margaret had to respect even if they complicated her desire to help. Over the next few days, Margaret found herself distracted during board meetings, her mind wandering to memories of Marcus's bright smile and Jasmine's quiet strength. She researched pediatric cardiology centers in the city, learning about wait times and costs that would be prohibitive for someone in Jasmine's situation. The numbers were staggering. Even by Margaret's standards, a complex heart surgery could easily cost more than most people earned in several years. She also found herself thinking about James's work and the foundation she'd established in his memory. The James Wellington Foundation focused on medical research and equipment donations, but it had never provided direct patient assistance. Perhaps it was time to expand their mission, to honor James's memory by helping children like Marcus who needed the kind of care he had dedicated his life to providing. It was Thursday evening when Margaret's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer. Her personal line was reserved for family and close friends, a very small circle indeed. But something made her pick up on the 4th ring. Mrs. Wellington? The voice was shaky, barely controlled. This is Jasmine. We met at the cemetery on Tuesday. I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. Margaret immediately sat up straighter in her home office chair, abandoning the acquisition reports she'd been reviewing. Jasmine, what's wrong? Are you and Marcus all right? Marcus collapsed at school today, Jasmine said, her voice breaking. They rushed him to Children's Hospital, and the doctors are saying his heart can't wait any longer. They want to do the surgery next week, but the insurance approval process could take months, and he might not have months. The desperation in Jasmine's voice cut through Margaret's usual emotional barriers like a knife. She could hear the sound of a hospital in the background, the beeping of machines, the soft rush of medical staff, the particular acoustics of institutional anxiety that she remembered all too well from James's final hours. Where are you now? Margaret asked, already reaching for her car keys. I'm at Children's Hospital, but you don't need to come. I remembered what you said about your son being a heart doctor, and I thought maybe you might know someone or have some advice about how to navigate all this medical bureaucracy. The social worker here is trying to help, but she has dozens of cases and… I'm coming, Margaret interrupted firmly. Don't make any decisions until I get there. Can you do that for me? She was already walking toward her garage, her mind shifting into the crisis management mode that had served her well in business, but felt different when applied to someone she actually cared about. You don't understand, Jasmine protested. I can't pay you back if you help us. I don't have connections or influence to offer you in return. I'm just a waitress with a sick kid and more bills than I can count. Margaret stopped walking, struck by the raw honesty of Jasmine's words. In her world, every relationship was transactional in some way, every favor given with the expectation of eventual reciprocation. But here was someone offering nothing but their genuine need and gratitude. "Jasmine," Margaret said gently, "sometimes help doesn't come with a price tag. Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do, because they have the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. Let me worry about the rest." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Margaret wondered if they'd been disconnected. Finally, Jasmine spoke in a whisper. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." The question stopped Margaret cold, forcing her to examine motivations she hadn't fully acknowledged, even to herself. Why was she willing to drop everything and rush to the hospital for a woman and child she'd met once at a cemetery? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. "Because my son would have wanted me to," she said simply. "Because you're a good mother fighting for her child, and that matters more than anything else in the world. Because Marcus is a beautiful little boy who deserves every chance at a full life. And because—" She paused, surprised by her own vulnerability. "Because I think I need to help you as much as you need help." 20 minutes later, Margaret walked through the automatic doors of Children's Hospital for the first time since James's death. The familiar smells and sounds hit her like a physical blow, bringing back memories she'd worked hard to suppress. But somewhere in the pediatric wing was a little boy who needed her help, and that gave her the strength to keep walking. Margaret found Jasmine in the pediatric cardiac unit waiting area, looking small and lost in a chair that seemed designed to dwarf worried parents. Marcus was sleeping in a nearby bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped with reassuring regularity. The sight of him so still and vulnerable, surrounded by medical equipment, brought back a flood of memories from James's early days as a resident when he would share stories about his young patients. "Thank you for coming," Jasmine whispered, standing as Margaret approached. Her waitress uniform had been replaced by scrubs that a nurse had apparently lent her, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying and exhaustion. "I can't believe you actually came. Most people just say they'll pray for you and then disappear." Margaret sat down beside her, noting the careful distance Jasmine maintained even in her gratitude. Trust, she realized, was a luxury that people in Jasmine's position couldn't afford easily. "What have the doctors told you?" "Dr. Peterson, she's the cardiac surgeon, says Marcus needs something called a ventricular septal defect repair. The hole in his heart has gotten bigger, and it's making his heart work too hard. Without surgery, he could go into heart failure." Jasmine's voice remained steady as she recited the medical terminology, but her hands trembled as she spoke. Margaret nodded, remembering James's explanations of similar procedures. "That's actually a fairly common surgery with excellent success rates when performed by experienced teams. Dr. Peterson has a good reputation." James mentioned her several times as one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the region. The mention of her son's professional knowledge seemed to provide Jasmine with some comfort. "The surgery itself isn't what scares me most," she admitted. "It's everything else, the bills, the recovery time I'll need to take off work, the possibility that there could be complications that require more procedures. I've been adding up numbers all day, and even with insurance covering part of it, we're looking at debt that will take me decades to pay off." Margaret had already done her own calculations during the drive to the hospital. The total cost would likely exceed $200,000, a figure that represented several lifetimes of work at Jasmine's current wages. Even with payment plans and financial assistance programs, the burden would be crushing for a single mother already stretched to her limits. "I've been thinking about that," Margaret said carefully. "The James Wellington Foundation focuses on pediatric medical care. We've never provided direct patient assistance before, but I think it's time we expanded our mission. Would you be willing to let us cover Marcus's medical expenses?" Jasmine turned to stare at her, incredulity and suspicion warring in her expression. "I looked you up," she said quietly. "After I got home Tuesday, I Googled your name on the library computer. You're Margaret Wellington of Wellington Industries. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Why would someone like you want to help someone like me?" The directness of the question caught Margaret off guard, but she appreciated Jasmine's honesty. "You're right to be suspicious," she admitted. In my world, nothing comes without strings attached. But this isn't about business or tax deductions or publicity. This is about a little boy who needs help and a mother who's doing everything possible to save him. It's about honoring my son's memory by doing what he would have done if he were still alive. Marcus stirred in his sleep, making small sounds that brought both women to their feet. Jasmine was at his bedside immediately, smoothing his hair and whispering soft reassurances. Watching her natural maternal instincts, Margaret felt a sharp pang of memory. She had done the same thing when James was small and frightened, before work and ambition had slowly eroded her ability to be fully present for the people she loved. "Mama?" Marcus opened his eyes, focusing on Jasmine with the trusting gaze that only children could manage in frightening circumstances. "Are you going to stay here with me?" "I'm not going anywhere, baby," Jasmine promised, taking his small hand in hers. "Mama's going to be right here the whole time." Margaret watched this exchange from a few steps away, moved by the profound love between mother and child. She thought about her own relationship with James, about all the times she had chosen work over presence, believing that providing financial security was the same as providing emotional security. Now, watching Jasmine's unwavering focus on her son's needs above all else, Margaret realized how much she had missed by prioritizing the wrong things. Dr. Peterson arrived during the evening shift change, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the confident manner that came from years of saving children's lives. Margaret recognized the type immediately. James had possessed the same combination of technical expertise and genuine compassion that made the best medical professionals. "Mrs. Johnson," Dr. Peterson addressed Jasmine with warm professionalism, "I've reviewed Marcus's latest test results with the cardiac team. His condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we initially anticipated. We need to schedule surgery for tomorrow morning." The news hit Jasmine like a physical blow, and Margaret instinctively moved closer, offering silent support. "Tomorrow?" Jasmine's voice was barely audible. "But I thought we had more time to figure out the financial arrangements, to get proper insurance approval." "I understand your concerns," Dr. Peterson said gently, "but Marcus's heart can't wait for bureaucracy. We have an opening in our surgical schedule, and waiting longer could significantly increase the risks involved." She glanced at Margaret, noting her expensive clothing and confident bearing. "Are you family?" "I'm a friend," Margaret replied simply, then made a decision that surprised even herself. "Dr. Peterson, I'd like to speak with you privately about covering all of Marcus's medical expenses. Whatever the total cost, whatever additional procedures might be needed, I want to ensure that financial considerations don't delay his treatment." Dr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded with professional composure. "Of course. Mrs. Johnson, would you like to be part of this discussion?" Jasmine looked between them, overwhelmed by the speed at which her life was changing. Yes, but I need to understand what this means. I can't accept charity if it means I'll owe something I can't repay." In the hallway conference room, Margaret laid out her proposal clearly and directly. The James Wellington Foundation would cover all of Marcus's medical expenses, including surgery, hospital stay, follow-up care, and any potential complications. There would be no expectation of repayment, no strings attached, no publicity or recognition sought. But why? Jasmine asked for the third time, as if she couldn't quite believe that such generosity could exist without hidden motives. "I'm nobody. I can't do anything for you or your foundation in return." Margaret chose her words carefully, knowing that her answer would determine whether Jasmine could accept help with her dignity intact. 3 years ago, I lost my son. He was a pediatric cardiologist who dedicated his life to saving children like Marcus. I've spent the last 3 years building monuments to his memory, research grants, hospital wings, medical equipment donations. But none of that has made me feel closer to him or made his death seem more meaningful. She paused, watching Marcus sleep peacefully in the bed visible through the conference room window. "Meeting you and Marcus at the cemetery, it's the first time since James died that I felt like I could do something he would truly approve of. Something that honors not just his professional legacy, but his heart. You're giving me the opportunity to be the kind of person he always wanted me to be." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, studying Margaret's face, as if trying to detect deception or manipulation. Finally, she spoke with quiet dignity. "If you do this for us, I want you to know that Marcus and I will never forget it. We may not be able to repay money, but we'll never forget the kindness. And when Marcus is grown, he'll know that there are good people in the world who help others simply because they can." Dr. Peterson, who had been listening to this exchange with professional discretion, cleared her throat gently. "If we're proceeding with surgery tomorrow, I'll need to get Marcus prepped this evening. The procedure will take approximately 4 hours, and he'll need to stay in the cardiac ICU for at least 48 hours post-surgery for monitoring." As they made arrangements for the next day, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins and acquisition strategies. For the first time since James's death, she was about to do something that would make a real difference in someone's life, something that honored his memory in the most meaningful way possible. Margaret stayed at the hospital that night, despite Jasmine's protests that she should go home and get proper rest. She couldn't explain why she felt compelled to remain, only that leaving felt like abandoning James's patients all over again. Instead, she made herself useful, using her business connections to expedite paperwork and ensure that every detail was handled smoothly. At 3 a.m., she found herself in the hospital chapel, a small interfaith space designed to accommodate the spiritual needs of families in crisis. She hadn't prayed in years, not since the night James died, when she had bargained unsuccessfully with whatever higher power might be listening. But sitting in the quiet darkness, she found herself speaking to her son again. "I think I understand now why you chose medicine over business," she whispered to the empty room. "I always thought it was because you wanted to rebel against the family company, to prove you didn't need my success to define yourself. But it was really about this, wasn't it? About being present for people when they need it most, about using your abilities to make a real difference in the world." She thought about all the board meetings she'd attended where James was a child, all the school events she'd missed for business trips, all the times she'd chosen professional achievement over personal presence. The success that had defined her entire adult life suddenly felt insignificant compared to Jasmine's courage and Marcus's innocent trust in the adults who were trying to save him. Jasmine found her there an hour later, having left Marcus's bedside only long enough to get coffee from the machine down the hall. "I thought you might be in here," she said softly, settling into the pew beside Margaret. "I used to come to chapel a lot when Tommy was sick. Sometimes it's the only place that feels safe when you're scared." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two mothers bound together by love and loss and the universal fear of failing to protect their children. Finally, Jasmine spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" Margaret nodded, realizing that normal social boundaries had dissolved somewhere between the cemetery meeting and the hospital vigil. "Do you have other family? Other children?" Jasmine's voice was gentle, but Margaret could hear the underlying question. Why was she alone in this crisis? Why did she seem to have no one else to call? "James was my only child," Margaret replied. "His father and I divorced when James was 12. I was too focused on building the business to maintain a marriage. I never remarried, never had other children. I told myself it was because I wanted to focus on being the best mother I could be to James, but the truth is I was probably too selfish to share my attention between more than one relationship." Jasmine absorbed this information without judgment, her own experience of single motherhood providing perspective that others might lack. "It's not selfish to work hard to provide for your family," she said diplomatically. "I work 3 jobs, and sometimes I worry that Marcus thinks work is more important to me than he is." "But you work because you have to," Margaret pointed out. "I worked because I wanted to, because building the company was more exciting than school plays and soccer games. I convinced myself that financial success was the best gift I could give James, but what he really wanted was just me. Present and engaged and interested in his world instead of always thinking about the next deal or acquisition." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the chapel door. Dr. Peterson appeared, still in surgical scrubs. "Mrs. Johnson? We're ready to take Marcus to pre-op. He's asking for his mama." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and waiting room anxiety. Margaret watched Jasmine maintain perfect composure, while signing surgical consent forms, kissing Marcus goodbye as he was wheeled into the operating room, and then finally breaking down in the privacy of the family consultation room. What if something goes wrong? Jasmine sobbed, all her strength finally cracking under the weight of fear and exhaustion. What if I lose him too? I can't survive that. Tommy always said I was stronger than I knew, but this is too much. Margaret held her as she cried, offering the physical comfort she wished someone had provided during her own darkest moments. Marcus is going to be fine, she said with more confidence than she felt. Dr. Peterson is exceptional. He's young and strong, and he is the most important thing going for him, a mother who loves him enough to fight for him. 6 hours later, Dr. Peterson emerged from surgery with the smile that every waiting parent prays to see. The repair went perfectly, she announced to Margaret and Jasmine, who had been maintaining their vigil in the surgical waiting area. Marcus did beautifully. His heart responded exactly as we hoped, and the defect has been completely corrected. Jasmine collapsed into Margaret's arms with relief, tears of joy replacing the tears of fear she'd been holding back all morning. Can I see him? When can I see him? He's in recovery now, and you can visit briefly once he's settled in the cardiac ICU. He'll be groggy from anesthesia for the next several hours, but his vital signs are strong and stable. Dr. Peterson's professional satisfaction was evident in her voice. With proper follow-up care, there's no reason Marcus can't live a completely normal, active life. When they were finally allowed to see him, Marcus looked impossibly small in the cardiac ICU bed, connected to monitors and tubes that tracked every heartbeat and breath. But his color was better than it had been in weeks, and when he opened his eyes briefly, his smile was as bright as ever. "Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "Did they fix my heart?" "Yes, baby," Jasmine replied, smoothing his hair with gentle fingers. "Your heart is all better now. You're going to be able to run and play just like other kids." Over the next 3 days, as Marcus recovered with the resilience that only children possess, Margaret found herself becoming part of their little family unit. She brought books for Marcus, decent coffee for Jasmine, and used her connections to ensure that every aspect of his care was handled smoothly. More importantly, she discovered the joy of being present for someone else's milestones. Marcus's first steps post-surgery, his first solid food, his first laugh that didn't make him tired. On the day of Marcus's discharge, as they prepared to leave the hospital, Jasmine turned to Margaret with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with something that looked like determination. "I've been thinking about what you said in the chapel," Jasmine began, carefully folding Marcus's new clothes, items Margaret had quietly arranged to be delivered. "About being present for the people you love. I want you to know that you've been more present for Marcus and me during the worst week of our lives than most people are for their own families." Margaret felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I think I needed to be here as much as you needed support. Maybe more. I have a proposition for you," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength. "I know you said this was about honoring your son's memory, and you've already done that. But what if it could be about more than just one surgery, one family? What if we could find a way to help other families like mine?" The idea sparked something in Margaret's mind, a vision that went beyond traditional corporate philanthropy to something more personal and direct. "What are you thinking?" "The James Wellington Foundation already exists," Jasmine pointed out. "What if we expanded it to provide not just money, but actual support for families dealing with pediatric medical crises? Someone to help navigate the system, to be present during the scary moments, to make sure no parent has to face what I faced alone." Margaret stared at her, amazed by the young woman's ability to think beyond her own crisis to the needs of others. "You're talking about completely restructuring how the foundation operates. It would mean hiring staff, developing programs, creating sustainable systems for ongoing support." "I'm talking about giving meaning to tragedy," Jasmine replied firmly. "Your son saved children's lives through medicine. You could save families through compassion and presence. And I." She paused, looking down at Marcus, who was playing with a toy car Margaret had brought him. "I could help because I understand what it feels like to be terrified and alone in a hospital at 2 a.m. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Peterson's final visit. "Marcus is cleared for discharge," she announced with satisfaction. "I want to see him in my office in 2 weeks for follow-up, then again in 3 months. But barring any complications, this little guy should be able to live a completely normal life." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Margaret realized that this experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of what it meant to build something meaningful. For 3 years, she had tried to honor James's memory through traditional corporate philanthropic gestures, large donations, naming rights, research grants. All important work, but somehow impersonal and distant from the actual human impact James had made during his life. Now, watching Marcus walk out of the hospital on his own strong legs, seeing the relief and hope in Jasmine's eyes, Margaret understood what had been missing. James hadn't just treated medical conditions. He had cared for families during their most vulnerable moments. He had been present, compassionate, and personally invested in outcomes that couldn't be measured in profit margins or tax deductions. "Jasmine," Margaret said as they reached the hospital exit, "I think your idea about expanding the foundation is brilliant. But I have one condition." She paused, smiling at both Jasmine and Marcus. "I want you to be part of it. Not just as a consultant or beneficiary, but as a real partner in building something that honors both James's memory and Tommy's legacy." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope rather than fear. "Are you serious? You'd want someone like me as a partner in your foundation?" "Someone like you is exactly what the foundation needs," Margaret replied with certainty. "Someone who understands what families are going through, someone who knows how to be present during crisis, someone who can help transform my resources into real human connection and support." As they walked toward Margaret's car, Marcus between them holding both their hands, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced since before James's death: genuine excitement about the future. Not excitement about business expansion or financial returns, but anticipation for the lives they could touch, the families they could support, the way they could honor the memory of 2 men who had loved deeply and selflessly. "Uncle Tommy would be so proud," Marcus announced with the profound insight that children sometimes possess. "He always said that good things happen when people help each other." Margaret squeezed his small hand, thinking about all the Tuesday afternoons she had spent talking to James's headstone, all the loneliness and regret she had carried for 3 years. Today felt like the beginning of something new, not an ending to her grief, but a transformation of it into something that could bring light to other families facing their darkest moments. As they drove away from Children's Hospital, Margaret caught Jasmine's eye in the rearview mirror. "You know," she said with a smile that felt rusty from disuse but genuine, "I think James and Tommy would have been great friends. And I think they'd be pretty happy about what we're planning to build together." The James Wellington Family Support Foundation was officially established 6 months later, with Jasmine as Director of Family Services and Margaret as Chairman of the Board. Their first initiative was a 24-hour support hotline for families dealing with pediatric medical emergencies, staffed by trained volunteers who understood both the practical and emotional challenges these families faced. But more importantly, 2 women who had met in grief over their sons' graves had found in each other something neither had expected: a partnership built on mutual respect, a friendship forged in crisis, and a shared commitment to ensuring that no family would face medical trauma alone. In helping each other heal, they had discovered that sometimes the most meaningful legacies are built not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of presence, compassion, and love.